did have a wee house in Kinlochard, or rather my father did, and I inherited it, a waterworks cottage on the pipeline from Kinlochard to Glasgow. My father taught in Glasgow University. When I was sent to the House of Lords, I was asked by Garter King-at-Arms, what do you want to be called? And I said, actually, I'd like to be called Kerr. And he said, no, you can't be called Kerr. You've got to be Kerr of something. I said, why can't I be Kerr? And he said, because we've got one. So I looked up who's who, and there wasn't one. So I went back to see him. Don't you think I know my bloody job? Listen, he said, in an old folks' home in Eastbourne is the Marquis of Lothian, who was then 90-something. In the House of Lords is Michael Ancram, the Earl, who will in due course become the Marquis. In the Ancram family, the Lothian family, Kerr is a courtesy title. If Ancram were to produce a legitimate male heir, he would be Lord Kerr, so you can't be. So I thought alliteration was a good thing, and I thought I'd be Lord Kerr of Kilburn, because I live in St John's Wood, very close to Kilburn. And the wife said, none of our St John's Wood neighbours would ever speak to us again. So I settled for Kinlochard. Though I did argue with Garter, and I took counsel with Lyon in Edinburgh. He's excellent. When you ring him up, he says, Lion here. The temptation to say giraffe speaking is enormous. Yeah, he was very, very good. He said he could do me a coat of arms at half the price charged in London. But he confirmed that I couldn't be a straight Kerr. I had to be Kerr of something. I asked him whether I could be Kerr of Kinlochard, and he said, we will have to see if there's any local objection. That was a Friday afternoon. On the Monday morning, he told me that there had been no local objection. I imagine the scene as the heralds in their tabards with their trumpets rode along the north shore of Lochard from Aberfoyle to Kinlochard. Know ye, know ye, know ye, that one John Kerr, formerly of this parish, claimeth Kinlochard for his title of. I don't think he did a bloody thing. But he certainly heard no local objection. They are clever in Kinlochard, actually. When it was out in the press, within a week of it being in the press, I received a very nice letter from the village, which said they'd been delighted to see that I was Kerr of Kinlochard. Now, as a matter of fact, the village hall needs a bit of restoration. So that's it, and I'm sorry it is a fraudulent title. I don't have the house anymore, much to my regret. Another stupid title was the title I gave tonight's talk, because I said we would talk about whether Brexit mattered and was it inevitable. And I realised almost immediately that to ask whether it mattered to this audience is absurd. You all know it matters, or you wouldn't be here. And I've since discovered that this is a very active cell of the sane resistance in the Mackie of the United Kingdom, and I am hearing about marches and a good deal of activity in Perth. So I say, very good. I marched in London. We were maybe a wee bit, maybe a few more than you had here. We thought we were 120,000. The police thought we were 140,000. There is something going on. But I don't want to waste any time on does Brexit matter, because I would be preaching to the choir. But I did read Cicero as a schoolboy, and I know you can do very well by saying, I won't mention X and I won't mention Y, and you mention them. So even although I'm not going to persuade you, because you know all about it, I think we do have to note that the economic damage would be enormous, and that, as John Major said the other day, the pain would be worse for those with the least. That is clearly the case. When the jobs effect starts, the Treasury papers on the scale of the impact effect and economic downturn, the figures are frightening, but it's probably best translated into jobs effect. There is no doubt that the flow of inward investment into this country would dwindle, and I think disinvestment would probably start quite soon. The SMMT, the motor car industry, believe that 50% of their industry will go unprofitable if we are outside the customs union and the single market. We know that Sunderland, which voted to leave, has the most efficient car factory Nissan have anywhere in the world. They won't close it, but they just won't put any new product lines into it. This is very sad. Nissan kept their heads down before the 2016 referendum, and they're still keeping their heads down, but they have made their decisions. And we've seen public warnings by Airbus, by Siemens, by a lot of big international companies that they would run down their operations. The problem is principally one of the way just-in-time product component delivery now works. If you have to have rules of origin checks at a customs frontier, that kills something like Nissan, where there are bits of the Nissan made in Sunderland which cross the channel 6 times, assuming the final car is exported, as most of them are, to the European market. It simply doesn't work. The component manufacturers are basically on 24-hour contracts. In other words, they pay a penalty if the component they're producing isn't on site at Sunderland within 24 hours of the expected time. The production lines, they're not all running 24 hours a day now, but the cost to the company, they're doing 2 shifts at the moment, so 16 hours a day. The cost to the company of a closure, because some component hasn't turned up, is gigantic. So the prices the component manufacturers pay are large. You can't stay in an integrated supply chain if you're not in a customs union. So we will suffer very serious economic damage. This morning's official estimate from the City Corporation is that between 12 and 16,000 jobs in the city go as the impact effect. We see most sensible finance houses establishing a base inside the 27. Bailey Gifford have got themselves an office in Dublin, where not all of Bailey Gifford will go, of course, but a bit of Bailey Gifford will have to go. The effect of the damage to the financial community on the tax take is very considerable and will play through into issues like financing the health service, financing pensions, really quite quickly. We know that what Dr. Fox is saying about export opportunities in the outside world is nonsense. The Chinese buy 5 times as much from the Germans as they buy from us. It's not our being in the European Union that's holding us back. It's that we aren't producing things that the Chinese want to buy. The Canadians buy more from the French now than they do from us. There are 2 ineluctable rules, by the way, in international trade. One is that trade halves as distance doubles. This is almost always correct. If you take Canada and Switzerland, we sell twice as much to Switzerland as we do to Canada. though Canada has 3 times the population of Switzerland. The reason for that is that Switzerland is a lot closer. The other ineluctable rule is that size really does matter. Trade negotiation is old-fashioned, mercantilist, arm wrestling. The size of the market that you are offering access to is your card in the negotiation. When we leave the European Union, if we leave, we will no longer be party to any of the European Union's 60 trade agreements with third countries. The one, by the way, just been announced with Japan is the result of 7 years' work and will be remarkable in its market opening effect, particularly for food exports from Europe of processed food and engineering products, and exports from Japan of motor cars. So there is a threat to Sunderland anyway. That will, the EU will reduce to 0 its tariff on Japanese cars. But my point is that if we are, when we are, if it happens, a market of only 60 million, the concessions we can offer in access to that market are much less valuable to the third country than when we were part of a 500 million market. That clearly gave us more weight. And it is old-fashioned mercantilist arms wrestling. So that's all the stuff that, like Cicero, I'm not going to mention. Which we do need to bear in mind. This is a seismic shock to the economy that we're heading for, which will hit the poorer people in our country very seriously indeed. I don't think there's any denying it. There's lots of other damaging effects cutting ourselves off from the continent will have, but that is the principal one. I would like to add one that you may not have thought of, because it's one downside of leaving the European Union, which is one that I feel very strongly. I was a diplomat. I served in Washington a few times. I was present at a number of Thatcher-Reagan meetings, and I was John Major's and then Tony Blair's ambassador to Bill Clinton. And it was astonishing, when you think about it, how much attention the Americans paid to us. Extraordinary. I could get access to the President of the United States within 24 hours if he was in America, whenever I wanted. And my arguments, the British government's arguments, would be heard very seriously. Bill Clinton clearly thought, and he confirmed that just the other day, he clearly thought that it was worth listening to the Brits, because if we did a deal with the British, they could sell it in the European Union. So we were actually doing a deal with, in these days, 15 countries, now 27 countries, 20 big countries. When I was Mrs. Thatcher's and then John Major's negotiator in Brussels, the times when my colleagues would really pick up their pencils and make careful notes of what I was saying would be when I said, if instead of following the Commission's prescription, we were to follow an alternative course, which I will now describe, we have reason to believe that we could bring the Americans into line with it. Sometimes when I said that, it was even true. We did have a reason to believe. This was what the French called the Trojan horse role of the British. It was actually widely recognized that we were the best interlocutor with the Americans, and that we were capable of striking deals, which made us get taken much more seriously in Brussels than we deserved as simply one of the 4 big member states. I think as a result of this synergy, as a result of this curious position that we accidentally got ourselves into, where we were more powerful in Washington than we would be on our own, and more powerful in Brussels, because Brussels knew we were quite powerful in Washington. We were able to do a lot of good for our friends in Canberra or Ottawa or Tokyo or Delhi or Africa, a lot of good that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own. So when Douglas Hurd always said we're punching above our weight, it's a silly expression, but it was dead right. We were punching above our weight. That has actually gone completely now. We cut very, very little ice in Washington at the moment. Mind you, the conditions in Washington are such to make it quite difficult to have a rational argument that cuts ice and wins. But our friends around the world, possible exception of the New Zealand dairy industry, and New Zealand lamb industry, and maybe bits of Australia, but most of our friends around the world think we're completely barking mad, and that their interests will suffer when we leave, if we leave the European Union. So that's my personal additional argument. I think Britain in the world will shrink. I think it is shrinking now. It's not irretrievable, but I think this is very sad, because I think the things that we stand for in the world, sort of free trade, liberal democracies and so on, the forces that are behind such things are under attack at present in the world, with the various disruptions going on, the success, huge economic success of a totalitarian regime in China. I think it's a great pity that the forces of democracy and liberalism should suffer self-harm, and they will suffer more than you might think, because we were in a mutually reinforcing partnership, being big in Europe, as well as being quite influential in America. I think this is not just a foreign policy mistake. It is a much bigger foreign policy mistake than Suez, from which we recovered in 10 years. I'm not sure that Munich in 1938 was a foreign policy mistake, but this one undoubtedly is a foreign policy mistake, as well as everything else, as well as an economic mistake. Okay, can we stop it? Yes, of course we can. But I need to start with a digression about Ireland, I think. I think that because of the position the government have got themselves into on Ireland, I think the chances of a negotiated deal are actually quite low now. On Ireland, our problem is the 4 red lines that Prime Minister May laid down at the party conference speech in September 2016, when she was clear that Brexit meant no further role for the European Court of Justice in Britain, no freedom of movement, no single market, and no customs union. Now, I don't know why she chose to do that. As a negotiating mistake, it was classic to pour concrete on your feet before the negotiation had started. It came as a surprise to many in her cabinet. It wasn't discussed in cabinet. It certainly wasn't discussed with Parliament. It wasn't discussed with the civil service, because it was a party conference speech. Therefore, it was prepared, drafted by Mr. Timothy, who was then Chief Special Advisor, and it wasn't seen by the civil service. But that is that's the root cause of her predicament. When you look at Ireland, she found herself last December being required by the European Union as part of the withdrawal agreement, the Article 50 agreement, the divorce agreement, not anything about the future, to guarantee that there would be no hard border across the island of Ireland. If we are not in a customs union with the EU 27, there will be a hard border. It won't be because Mr. Varadkar wants one. He doesn't want one. It will be because it will be his responsibility to man the frontier of the customs territory of the EU customs union. People would turn a blind eye at the odd cow being smuggled across the frontier. That's not the problem. The problem is that
the EU is well aware of the possibility of goods coming into Belfast from a third country, perhaps in flat pack form for final assembly or whatever. If no rules of origin checks are made on them, then there is a way for the Korean or the Japanese manufacturer to get into the European Union by assembling in Northern Ireland and bringing south of the border, selling on into Germany or wherever. The customs union can't agree that. I remember when the Poles joined, the Poles drew attention to the very close ethnic, economic, religious, commercial links to the northwestern province of the Ukraine, known as Galicia. That's the other Galicia. The Poles argued, couldn't we have a soft border with these people who are basically just like us? And the European Union said, absolutely not. You are guarding the frontier of the customs union. We like these people and we'll give them plenty of aid, but we cannot allow them unrestricted access into our market, because if we did, then Russian goods or Turkish goods or whatever would come into the European Union without being controlled and taxed. So we now have in the white paper, published a fortnight ago, we have Mrs. May's fifth attempt to solve this, in my view, insoluble problem of having no hard border but not being in the customs union. The amendment that I proposed in the Lords, was carried by 123 votes, majority in the Lords, was that we should explore the possibility of a customs union with the European Union. We can't be in the customs union, we have to go to member states, but we could have a customs union. The arguments against me were, well, the Turks are the customs union, but it's never worked very well. We would get a completely different kind of customs union if we asked for it from the one the Turks have. But the government is not prepared to explore this, and they used their majority in the Commons to knocked it out a second time last week by a majority of 6 in rather odd circumstances, with pairs being broken and so on. So there are plenty of people in the House of Commons who know that it is the answer, but the government will not adopt it. What they propose now is what is known as what they call a facilitated customs arrangement, which has not yet been killed by Brussels, but will be killed next week. The proposal was, in the white paper, that we would collect at ports of entry into the UK, we would collect our tariffs and do our checks on goods heading for our market, but we would also collect the different tariffs due to the European Union and do their checks on the goods which are going to go through Britain in somewhere else in the European Union, thus avoiding a customs frontier between us and the European Union. Now, this is very unpopular with business, the idea of running 2 separate checks, clogging up your ports, segregating cargoes, having to look for the bits that are going to Germany and the bits that are staying in Britain and so on. That was pretty unpopular. But at least our proposal said, we will not, however, require our partners to do the same. So we will clog up our ports, but the ports of Antwerp, Bremen, Rotterdam will not be clogged up by their having to conduct 2 checks. Mr. Rees-Mogg didn't like that. He thought it was reciprocal and vassalage, and the House of Commons voted, with the government voting with Mr. Rees-Mogg, voted to say, oh yes, they do have to do it. So a proposal which was a silly proposal in my view in the first place is now completely non-negotiable and will be killed this week, because we are now saying that all continental ports must be clogged up, while goods that are heading from the UK are identified, segregated, followed electronically till they reach the UK, and a central clearinghouse must be constructed where our tariffs are, their tariffs are. It's Cloud Cuckooland. It's definitely not going to happen. So she will have to come up with a 6th solution to this conundrum. I don't believe there is a solution. Therefore, I don't believe that a soft Brexit is very likely. She is rejecting the EU's draft, translating the formula that she agreed in December into treaty language. The EU's draft, as a backstop, says if nobody can think of anything better, then what we'll have is Northern Ireland will be treated, first time ever in European history, as an exclusive economic zone like Hong Kong, China, outside the European Union, but inside the customs union. We reject that flat out on constitutional grounds that we cannot have a frontier, a customs frontier in the Irish Sea, and because the DUP, who hold the crucial votes in Parliament, don't like it for obvious reasons. I understand. I don't like it either, the idea of a customs union inside the United Kingdom. It's very unattractive. But what is our answer? We reject their answer. We have now come up with 5 answers, none of which will work. And we appear to be in the pockets of Mr. Rees-Mogg. So whoever is doing the negotiating in Brussels on this, whether it's Mr. Raab or Mr. Robbins or the Prime Minister herself, I do not know how they get out of this. Therefore, it seems to me that if we stick to the red line on customs union, which was laid down in September 2016, then there can be no soft Brexit. And the white paper proposals fall, not just because they're attacked from the right of the Conservative Party, but because they're unsaleable in Brussels. There are other solutions to the problem. I myself am very attracted by an EEA solution, a Norway solution, which I think for British business is much the best solution. But it carries the right of free movement. And we are saying we absolutely won't have free movement, so it breaks another red line. I don't know what the answer to that is. Okay, enough about digression about Ireland. Yes, of course we can get out of this. I see 5 scenarios. I think the crisis comes probably in November. It might come as early as October, but there are 5 possibilities. One is that I'm wrong, and there is some sort of fudge, soft Brexit deal. I think it depends on the Labour Party, but I think it fails in the House of Commons. It might fail because the DUP are against it, for the reasons we've just discussed. It might fail because the Labour Party would like an election and would like to try to take part, or it might fail because Mr. Rees-Mogg thinks it's too soft. Here the key position will be that of Mr. Gove, I think. Mr. Gove up to now is saying Johnson is wrong. We should accept a period of vassalage. The crucial thing is to be out. If we get out in March 2019, then we can change anything. We can tear up agreement signed, and we can we'll be out on our own. Mr. Gove is very clever, and that might. There are people in this room who know much more on the Conservative Party than me. I'm a political eunuch, as you know. I'm a crossbencher. I have no views on party politics at all. But that might swing enough votes for Mrs. May. But it is clear that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Davies and the ERG group would vote against the sort of soft deal which was in the white paper published a fortnight ago, and any deal negotiated with the European Union would end up being a lot softer than that. So it seems to me unlikely that it carries a majority unless the Labour Party change their present position. It would pass none of their current 6 tests. And I think the 6 tests are, I don't know about the workings of the Labour Party. That's scenario 1, a soft deal, a political crisis, Parliament doesn't vote. Second scenario, a hard deal to please the ERG. There is no possibility of agreeing a hard deal. Nobody's saying would do it. We shouldn't want to crash out. The other side don't want us to crash out. So this one should be avoidable, but it could happen by accident. We have so far negotiated very badly, and we have put ourselves under time pressure. It was a pity that we sent in our Article 15 notification in March 2017 and didn't get round to starting to think what our negotiation position should be until June 2018. Some idiot who wrote the article wrote a 2-year time period into it. And it's starting to run out. The clock is ticking, as Mr. Barnier says every time he speaks. A hard Brexit could happen by accident. Now that would be a major disaster. That's a scenario in which the planes stop flying and the queues of lorries on the Dover Road. My worry about that is, I think once you're into that, it's very hard to get out of it, because the Conservative Party, or at least the right wing of the Conservative Party, would say all bets are off, including our paying the bill. One of the elements of the December deal was that we agreed what our past commitments amounted to in financial terms, and that we would honour them. The number that was put on it was 39 billion euros. Actually, it will come to just a little bit over 50, but everybody agreed to keep played down for the moment. But the ERG say we don't pay anything, we go. If we don't pay anything, then the EU will pursue us in the Court of Arbitration. It is that no member state would say they shouldn't. All the member states have to contribute to the budget. They would all have to contribute more to fill the gap. We would have no agreements of any kind with the European Union. Everything would fall because we would be a defaulter state and they would be putting pressure on us to pay. So everything would fall. There would be no possibility of any of their 50 agreements, our 50 agreements with third countries carrying on. The EU would notify that we were a defaulter state and nobody would do business with us, except that Mr. Trump, who's quite keen on defaulting. That's when it really would be brought home to people, because the holidays in Majorca would be affected. The planes genuinely would stop flying for a period. But we would be on our high horse. The Daily Mail would be saying that we're not paying a penny, they've treated us very badly, we're storming out. It's quite difficult to get back down from your high horse once you're on it. So I see that as a deadlock that might last for quite a long time and do a lot of damage. It therefore seems to me to be an unlikely scenario, because Mrs. May is a perfectly sensible human being, and she is not going to want to do that to the country. So although the parliamentary arithmetic is very, very difficult for her, it seems to me she will want to try to avoid the crash-out scenario. And I think it is unlikely, because it would be so awful. Which brings me, therefore, to scenario 3. The genius who wrote the article did include the possibility of an extension. It's 2 years. It's 2 years unless by unanimity they decide it isn't. They decide it can go on. I predict that at the October European Council, the 27 will say to us that this isn't going very well. I think we need more time. Mrs. May will then be in a bit of a fix, because nobody knows why she wrote the letter on the 29th of March 2017, and nobody can possibly say that the country voted in 2016 to leave on the 27th of March 2019. She has nevertheless decided that it must be written into the law of the land, and it was put into the withdrawal bill. Rather eccentrically, it was the Duke of Wellington who laid on the amendment that took it out in the House of Lords. Rather splendid that the Duke of Wellington is amending the government's legislation. We carried his amendment by a huge majority too, and it was knocked out in the House of Commons. For some reason, it's seen as crucial. So I think we might be in the very paradoxical position by the third week of October that the 27 are saying this isn't going very well, we all need more time, shall we extend? And we, the British, are saying certainly not, and heading on towards the cliff edge, like praised lemmings. But an extension could be very significant because my scenario 4 is an election. I've described a situation in which Parliament is deadlocked. Normally what a government would do in these circumstances is seek a more compliant Parliament. Well, I see a real possibility of an election next winter. And my last scenario would be the one that we all think in this room, I think is the right answer, and that is the people's vote. And it seems to me they might come in sequence. We would need an extension if we were going to have a people's vote. There are some who say, oh, we mightn't get it. Of course we would get it. A, the 27 don't want us to go. B, 27 democracies can't turn down a democracy saying it wants to consult the people. So there's absolutely no doubt that we will get an extension. There's a slightly more doubt about whether we will get an extension if the purpose was simply to carry on negotiating. I think we would, but I'm not so sure. I'm quite sure that if we needed it for an election or we needed it for a referendum, we would get it. The necessary unanimity would be available. I can see a scenario in which the Labour Party, at its party conferences in September, adopts the people's vote. It seems to me, I'm slightly surprised it hasn't yet, actually, because it looks to me like the ideal let-out for Mr. Corbyn, who is never going to want to be a deathbed convert to the European Union, which he regards as a capitalist club. But he will be saying, as all oppositions do, that's their job, the government has handled all this very badly, they've negotiated very badly. All oppositions say that. The difference this time is it's true. That will be what Mr. Corbyn will be saying. I can hear him saying, it's so unlike what we were told by the Leavers in 2016. I think the people need to be consulted again. So the People's Party recommend voting to the people. That seems to me to be quite possible as what the Labour Party will do in September. I think they're less likely to move on single market. They moved last year on customs union, and Keir Starmer on customs union is very good and made much better speeches in the Commons than I made in the Lords. Single market, I think, is more difficult for them. People's vote seems to me to be obvious that that's what they should be wanting to do. But of course, there are some there's a Trotskyite position, which is what we want as an election, and therefore worst is best. We need to get into a real crisis, and we don't want to give the government the way out of a people's vote. We'd rather have a showdown election in a crisis. So I don't know how that works out. But it seems to me there are 3 points. I'll stop there. 3 last points. 3 things that we should all be trying to do. First, it is the case that an Article 15 notification is revocable. The die is not cast. Even most of the Brexiteers are now accepting that that's true. They're stopping using the argument, the die is cast. Mrs. May, however, still believes that we need to leave on the 29th of March, but she doesn't say, and the government law officers won't allow her to say, because it's not true, that in EU law you can't withdraw the letter. So we could take the letter back. What we have is not a crisis with the European Union. We wouldn't need to persuade them. What we have is a domestic crisis. We are having an existential crisis trying to work out who we are and what we believe in. They are watching with horror. Actually, most of them are bored of us now. The top issues in the European Union at the moment are 1, immigration, 2, Trump, 3, Putin, 4, values, with the fight with the Poles and the Hungarians, and now Mr. Salvini in Italy, which is a very important issue. We are perhaps in at number 5 or thereabouts, but basically they're bored. They would be thrilled if we wanted the letter back. And our legal right to do so is unchallengeable. We would pay no price, provided we take it back before the end of the 2-year period or any agreed extension of it, because we would never have left. We would not be required to do an accession negotiation. We would be a member in good standing, and our status would be exactly as it always been. So those who say, oh, we'd lose the rebate on the budget are talking nonsense. The rebate is embedded in the own resources decision, which some genius, not me, put it in there. That's a good place to put it, because you can only amend the own resources decision by unanimity. So provided we remember not to vote for withdrawing our rebate cannot be withdrawn. So we would be required to join the euro. Nonsense. We would be required to join Schengen. No, we would not be required to do anything. Actually, I would offer something myself to improve the atmosphere. I would advise the Prime Minister, if I was advising the Prime Minister, that it would be a good idea to say that the United Kingdom, and in its view all non-Eurozone countries, should give a voluntary undertaking that they would never obstruct measures which Eurozone countries think necessary for the stability of the euro, provided the interests of the non-Eurozone members were not thereby affected. I think that would be well worth doing, because the negotiation which has left most bitterness in Europe was the midnight negotiation when David Cameron in 2011 attempted to veto the fiscal, what they grandiosely called fiscal union, which was a slight strengthening of the defences of the stability of the euro. It didn't affect us directly, but we decided that it would be a good idea to try and improve the City of London's terms vis-à-vis the Eurozone, and it failed, and it left a lot of bitterness, particularly in Paris. So that's the one concession I would make, which in my view is not a concession, because since the stability of the euro is a strong British interest, it would be pretty damn silly if we tried to obstruct measures necessary to maintain its stability. So, but we can't be charged for it. No price, political, no price. Well, of course, we left looking like idiots, but we're looking like idiots right now. So no change there. That's point one. Please go on getting across. It is not true that the die is cast. If we decide we want to stay, we absolutely can. Second point. It would be nice if we thought that a parliament, either this parliament or after an election, the next parliament, would have the guts to say we are a parliamentary democracy, and actually we, who are here in a Burkean sense, using our judgment, we're not delegates mandated by the people, we've decided that it would be a mistake to do what the referendum said. That would be nice, but it's not going to happen. So we are not going to stay in unless the House of Commons asks the country to have a look at the question again. So we are going to need, that is how we will get a people's vote, by the House of Commons kicking the can down the road, not taking a decision on leave or remain, but saying the country should be asked to take the decision on leave or remain. And I think this is what could well happen, because I predict that the Labour Party position will move. I don't think there's any point campaigning to get Parliament to overturn it itself. I think what we should be asking our members of Parliament is, the right answer is to put it back to the people. Now, I don't know if we would win a second referendum. I think we can imagine the fury of the Mail, and I'm afraid the Telegraph as well. We would there will be a xenophobic campaign against us, because the failure of the Brexit negotiation would be blamed on foreigners, that evil man Barney and all the chap Juncker and so on. They didn't let us have our Brexit, they messed it up. It would be quite nasty, but I think this time round, the voices that were silent last time, that should have spoken up, would speak up. A business and enterprise kept its head down last time because they thought, as I thought, that we were going to win it. That they didn't have to irritate any section of their customers or clients or whatever. They could just keep their heads down. They now are well aware of the economic price that they pay if we come out, and it seems to me they will be up in a way that they weren't last time. But don't ask Parliament to solve the problem, just ask Parliament to kick the problem back to the people. Third question, now this is very delicate ground, but I've decided to do this last in case you all rise and smite me. This is about the SNP, and I of course know very, very little about the SNP, because I do live in London. I had a bumpy relationship with Alex Salmond, because in the independence referendum here, he was maintaining that Scotland, if it became independent, needn't leave the European Union, but could remain in the European Union. An extra chair would be pulled up to the table, and we would be welcome. I was the guy, the boring ex-diplomat, who kept on saying it doesn't work like that. The entity that is a member of the European Union would be the reduced United Kingdom. You would be outside knocking on the door. And just think about Catalonia. The Kingdom of Spain would remain in the European Union if Catalonia was going independent. Since the Catalan threat was quite big even then, I said you can bet your bottom dollar that the Spanish would not move a muscle to help an independent Scotland get into the European Union. So I had public quarrels with Alex Salmond. I see a bit of the First Minister now, and I sit on something called the Standing Council, very grand, which advises us from time to time. I helped a bit with the economic bit of the two white papers that the Scottish government published. I thought the economic bit was just fine. It was very good. I think the analysis was the numbers on the effect of the economy of Brexit were very similar to the ones that the Treasury have produced this year, and the government failed to suppress. I think that they were using the phrase of Allender computer and so on, and I think they did a very good job. There still were traces in their papers of what I see as the Salmond heresy, that Scotland could in some magic way stay in without going through an accession negotiation. It doesn't work, and if an independent Scotland applies, you can forget things like budget rebates. An independent Scotland cannot say to Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, we Scots are so poor that we can't pay the full club subscription that you lot are paying, so we want a rebate. That doesn't work. If you're, unlike the British, returning, having never left, if Article 50 is withdrawn, the Scots, as independents, would pay the full price when they join. I'm not, and that was fudged a bit in the white paper. I'm not quite clear what the First Minister wants. And on the question of the people's vote, I am worried that she is not clear on what she wants. Because the SNP votes could actually be crucial at Westminster on this issue. Now, I can see from outside the SNP, I don't know anything about them, and the probably people in this room I know a great deal about them, but I can see there are some who will want a grievance, who, because for them the key desideratum is independence for Scotland. So being dragged out of the European Union by Mrs. May's government might not seem too bad. I don't know how many there are, but there are bound to be some people like that. I don't think, it's my impression, that is not the position of the First Minister. But another thing could be in her mind. She presumably is thinking about another independence referendum, and she possibly doesn't want the slot filled by our referendum, the EU referendum. And she, during the lifetime of this Scottish Parliament, she presumably at least wants to keep open the option of having another go, though the polls currently suggest she wouldn't win. That is my view, though it is just an observer from outside. I have no inside knowledge, is probably why the SNP have sat on the fence on the issue of the people's vote. I think we need to get them off the fence. I think it is really important. I think we need to play back on them their own arguments about the huge damage to the Scottish economy, the United Kingdom economy, of leaving the European Union. And say that's why we need a people's vote, because the Westminster Parliament isn't going to put this right. The best we can do is to get the Parliament to refer it to the people, and we need your support. And if you obstruct this, we will not forgive you. So that's where I end up. You'll see why I put that one last. Got to run to the exit.
Let's see you from yourselves.
That's it. I think three things are true. One, the arguments were not explained at the time of the 2016 referendum. That's clearly true. I was on the Remain campaign. We were useless. We were really bad. And the other side got away with a lot of lies. And most important, we failed to divide the other side. The other side were a coalition of some very nasty, ultra-nationalistic, anti-immigration forces, and some very interesting free market, libertarian, free movement of people just fine, sort of Michael Gove's position, where probably the ideal was that we should float off and be a sort of Singapore. And we failed to separate that. I mean, I got in trouble for saying in a public speech after the referendum that the official Leave campaign had cunningly outsourced the racism to the others, and that was thought to be unfair. But I think it was fair. I mean, say the allegation that the Turks would be in within 5 years, and there was no way we could stop them. 80 million Turks would be a complete lie, and of course it needs unanimity to get them in. And look at Erdogan, he fails all the tests of European values. But we failed to sort of pin that down. We did a very bad job. I think we couldn't do worse next time. Second thing is true, I think that the parliamentary system is bust. I don't think the country's remotely interested in hearing about midnight lies and people who turn up to vote or don't turn up to vote, and fascinating amendments in the House of Lords. That's not what it's about. Thirdly, like you, I actually believe in the European for a completely different reason. I remember how pleased my father was when Mr. Heath got us in. And I remember my father talking about his father, who had been a chaplain to a Highland regiment on the Somme. My father was an army doctor and fetched up on Lüneburg Heath with Montgomery, and was the first doctor into Bergen-Belsen. And he never recovered from that. And my father thought our joining the European Union and making sure the European Union worked, and I think we did have a positive influence in it, was actually a sort of moral duty. And none of that dimension has got into the public debate. The politicians seem to me not quite rising to the level of events. What was I playing at when I drafted it? Well, first, it's not entirely my fault. Even if there wasn't a procedure for leaving the European Union, anybody could always leave the European Union. If you stop paying the bills and coming to the meetings, they're a dozy lot over there, but in due course they would notice that you'd left. Why did we put it in? We put it in because we were really thinking about the Greek colonels, or we were thinking about Haida in Austria, which was not long before the convention, where I was the Secretary General and Giscard d'Estaing was the president. I think he was thinking mainly about Greece, because Giscard was the French president who got the Greeks into the European Union. He's a hero in Greece. And we got the Greeks in immediately after the fall of the colonels. We got them in far too soon, and it would have been much better if they'd had a few more years embedding a market economy in Greece, but never mind. The thought was that if we used I'm sorry, this is a bit technical, if we used our Article 7, which is the article which enables us to withdraw voting rights from a country in breach of European values, an article that might be used against the Hungarians now, Mr. Orbán's government, or might be used against the Poles over what they're doing to the courts. If we used that article against some military government, dictator, totalitarian, something awful's happened in an EU country, they would probably storm out in a huff. So we needed a procedure for storming out in a huff in a way that maintained legal continuity. We didn't, of course we couldn't stop him storming out in a huff, and that's why the 2-year limit came in. The 2-year limit came in to suit the departing state, because we thought people would go on maintaining, as the male has for 40 years, that you're chained to your horse, there's no way out. So the article says that after 2 years, with or without an agreement, you're out, unless you get an extension. But we were thinking about a dictator who had broken all the liberal democratic rules and had his rights withdrawn and said, don't you dare insult my country like this, I'm off. A not implausible scenario. That's why it was there. It never occurred to me for a moment that a sane democratic country like this one would actually invoke the article. When the process can be reversed, it's entirely our decision. All we have to do is to put in Downing Street, or persuade the incumbent of Downing Street, that the letter should be withdrawn. That the Sewell Convention, which says that the government won't normally legislate except with the consent of the Scottish Parliament, was written into the Scotland Bill, the Scotland Act, in quotation marks. And the Supreme Court have already established in the case last year that it does not have the force of law. So I think in a way Scotland was conned. because part of the vow and all that was that it would be written into the law of the land. It is in the law of the land, but as in quotation marks, which the lawyers say means that it isn't an operative sentence. As for the substance of the debate on Brexit between the Scottish Parliament and the Westminster Parliament, I think the Scottish Parliament is correct. I think that that's not what's going to be tested by the Supreme Court. I think they are correct. The issue is when policies which are devolved policies, but where the devolved administrations are required to act within a framework of EU law, what happens when EU law no longer applies in the UK, when that brake is taken off? Can they do whatever they like? And the Westminster answer is no, we need to maintain a single UK market, and we might be off doing trade deals with third countries. So I'm sorry, for at least for a period, maybe we'll be able to end it after a while, but at least for a period, the UK replaces the EU as the constraint on the Scottish Parliament acting. I think that is completely wrong and a breach of the devolution settlement. The devolution settlement says, except in areas that are reserved, and it lists them, the Scots may do what they like, of course within the collar of EU law. But when the collar is removed, it seems to me the Scots should be free to do what they like. And if the negotiation bit started on the basis that you will be free, but actually we may want to do trade deals with third countries, then let's come to a working agreement, let's come to a convention on how we will coordinate our position for deals with third countries. I think that would have been a very good thing. The other argument, the argument about need to maintain an internal market, is in my view completely wrong. I don't see why, and it already happens with taxation on drink and things like that. You can see a difference on the two sides of the border. It doesn't matter. People are not going to drive huge distances to do their shopping to get a slightly different rate. I think provided there are common standards for health and environment and that sort of thing, provided the safety of the goods is agreed on a national UK system, it should be entirely open to the Scots. That, I think, is what devolution means. I think devolution means an acceptance of a degree of diversity. So I believe that the substance of the UK government position is wrong, but I think on the issue being tested by the court, I think the UK government's going to win.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've no idea. On the second. On the first, I'm very glad you asked it. Our press didn't report it, but in the margins of the last European Council, the June European Council, the 27 decided what they would do about the European election if the Brits were still in, which shows they're thinking about an extension. The European election is either late May or early June 2019. And they had decided a year ago on how to divide up the 71 seats that the British were vacating. Some of them went to large member states, and some of them were kept in reserve for a future accession arrival of a new member. They've now decided that, despite all that, despite the fact that in France and Germany they think they've got an extra couple of seats and so on, the French and Germans, everybody has agreed that if the Brits decide to stay, then their 71 seats stay with the Brits. We would have a problem because we would have to decide, are we going to have a European election, or are we going to roll over the existing members, if it's a short extension going on, or are we going to go for nominated members, as we did when we first joined, and as the Romanians and Bulgarians did the other day when they first joined?
So there's lots of things that we could quarrel about, but they are ready for it. They think they clearly think it is possible that it might happen. I think it's possible that it might happen.
Thank you.
I can't help you on money laundering. Honestly, there's nothing. Well, it's astonishing, isn't it? I heard two members of the House of Lords saying to each other casually in the corridor, a few years of being a bit poorer won't do us any harm. But it won't do either of them any harm. They're both really quite well off. But I mean, it is shocking, actually. I admit that it is perfectly possible that 15 years out, we've come out of the trough and the economy is back up again. But we mustn't put people through that. And what really annoys me is that it's the Bullingdon boys who will be perfectly fine, and it's the poorer people in the country who are really going to hurt.